the quarter. My name is Jennifer Dill. I'm a faculty member in the School of Urban Studies and Planning, and along with Rob Bertini, my colleague, who is in Civil and Environmental Engineering and Urban Studies and Planning, we organized this weekly seminar. Glad to have such a nice turnout on a gorgeous day and this week of the quarter. I want to remind everyone when you ask questions to hold down on the touch button on the little microphone in front of you so that the folks out in webland can hear your question. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Marchand, who is a planner with TriMet, and he is also on the verge of finishing his MERP degree in the next 2 weeks.
Road, as I say, and get out and talk about it. We haven't really done any outreach or presentations since year one, which was in the year 2000, so I'm pretty excited to share what's happened in the region over the last few years. I've passed out some general material, and I think there's a single brochure that's going around, so that might need, I think Shelley might have it right now. It needs to keep moving, the brochure. So anyway, we just kind of keep that moving. The rest of them are flyers, and those everyone can keep a copy, and I have a few other handouts I'll give out when we come to that topic. So anyway, okay. So the Job Access Program, maybe a little background here on the program real quick. In 1996, President Clinton signed essentially what we call welfare reform, and AMAZER isn't an acronym for this yet. The Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, otherwise known as Welfare Reform, in 1996, which essentially ended the program as we know it. And for those of you that are familiar with it, it essentially meant that there was a decent to high percentage of welfare recipients that could no longer qualify for indefinite aid. So the clock started ticking, and I think on average 2 to 3 years people had to find full-time gainful employment before they lost their benefits. Well, 2 years after that, ICE-T came along, which I'm sure most of us are familiar with, or T21, I'm sorry. And what that did was free up funding for the transportation element or challenge for people finding work. Because through research, they had realized that one of the biggest problems with people finding work was the fact that they didn't have transportation reliable options on how to get to work. So T21 addressed that and created funding for the Job Access Program, which was delegated to the FTA. And so that's why one of the reasons that TriMet actually handles that or administers the program for the region is the FTA connection, and obviously the Transit Authority being TriMet here. So the general purpose of the grant is, it's interesting, it's obviously to establish connections and get people to work and connections to employment centers, but really the idea is to inspire the formation of regional plans that will be in place for the long run, which will help people find jobs, not just next year, but this program, hopefully, with enough time, it can sustain itself without grant funds. But I'll talk a little bit more about future funding. But that's the general idea of the grant, is to inspire the formation of regional plans. The goals outlined in the regulations are, I've sort of parted them down, or put them into basically two fields, and that's providing transportation services for people living in urban, suburban, rural environments, and getting them to jobs in urban, rural, and suburban environments. Because the whole idea of the central city housing most of the jobs in the region is no longer necessarily true. I mean, there's definitely an acknowledgement that the suburban job market has increased considerably over the last several years. And then collaboration, which is the grant stresses pulling people together, not just TriMet running the plan, but pulling a committee together and administering the plan, having nonprofits, social service organizations, private sector employers, community colleges, everyone working together to create the plan. So those are the two goals. And also outlined in the regulations of the grant are service strategies. These are some examples that they put forth in the grant as how to address or achieve these goals, and those are, of course, through fixed route bus service, being the FTA connection. Shuttle services work really well in the suburbs. Demand responsive van service, really good for rural services. Guaranteed ride home, doctor's appointments, child care emergencies. If someone takes transit to work, they would have an opportunity to take care of such a trip with a service like that on short notice. Carpooling. Encouraging bicycling, actually, is clearly outlined in the regulations, which is quite nice. And then the grant allows for the funding of capital projects as well, which for the most part is purchasing vehicles for rural and suburban type services. Funding, real quick. Again, we talked about ICE-T, or T21. I'm sorry, keep jumping back to ICE-T, founding father. Anyway, the program, ICE-T allocated for the annual funding of $150 million, which is great. It's a little misleading, though. It's a 5-year program. That's actually what the funding is at the 5th year. The funding actually started 1999 at $50 million. T21 guaranteed $50 million. And then for every year after, you threw on another 25. So you've got 50, 75, 100, and so forth. Till the 5th year of the program, the last year of the program, you reach your $150 million. So any amount over that T21 guarantee results from congressional appropriation. And to my knowledge, if it's occurred in the past, it hasn't been for much. Most of the funding is out of T21. So, okay. Hope I didn't jump. Okay. In Portland, in 1999, we secured for the region $1 million. That's basically what we applied for. In the second year, in the year 2000, 850, a little less. I think in the second year, even though there was more funding from T21, 850 because I think more people were aware of the program. They had more applications coming into the FTA. It's a competitive process. So in 2001, we jumped ahead to 1.8. We asked for quite a bit more money and got it. And then, of course, 1.8 again in 2002. And these are federal base years. So actually, TriMet fiscal years, you could actually add a few years to each of these. So $1999 were actually spent in the region in 2000, 2001. It's kind of odd how it works, but the last year the grant, 2.1 million. We actually asked for about 2.7, so we didn't do too bad. It's, and I could talk about some of those services as well. And real quick, it's a 50-50 match. It's a dollar-for-dollar grant, so if we ask for $1 million, we need to come forth with the $1 million match in documentation up front. And the main, we've received match from a number of providers, a lot of small providers, TMAs, which you're probably familiar with, Transportation Management Associations. But the big three in Portland are, of course, TriMet and the City of Portland, not surprising. And then the Oregon Department of Human Services actually purchases a lot of bus fares for their clients, and that actually qualifies as match. So those are the big three, and it's really broken down in almost thirds. I don't have the exact numbers, but for the purposes of this exercise, it's about a third each. So, and it really adds up if you look at the total funding over 5 years. So I've provided sort of a summary here of what we've done in Portland. TriMet was designated as the regional applicant and plan administrator. We form the Regional Job Access Advisory Committee. Again, that collaboration I kind of mentioned, where we get a lot of nonprofits, community colleges. We have a lot of private transportation providers, county representatives, rural communities, private sector, all kinds of stakeholders. Yeah.
How large is the committee?
It started as high as, I think, 25. Right now, since I think the last committee meeting we had in March, there were probably 16 or 17 people. So it's sort of an ad hoc committee. So we invite as many people as we can, but it does change a bit. But TriMet has always chaired the committee. So TriMet did quite a bit of research. Planning staff, research staff at TriMet did quite a bit of research in the region. Through that research, we tried to determine where the highest concentrations of low-income populations were in the region, where the best, most suitable jobs for those folks, which are generally entry-level, somewhat low-skilled jobs that pay livable wages with benefits. And I'll show you a couple maps here where we've determined where those areas are. And what we do is, based on those concentrations, we establish target areas, or when the plan was originally written, we refer to them as hubs. Through the committee, we determine how we could best serve these areas, and then the process of contracting and implementing services, which I'm all too familiar with because contracting is a big deal, and TriMet handles all that. So I love this map, but it's got it requires a few explanations. There's an error. Actually, first of all, it's based on 1990 census, which I know is obviously very old. But it's the census data that the plan was based on when it was written in 1998. We're aware that the data has changed, and so we've allowed programs to evolve in areas out in Clackamas County, where we know low-income populations have grown. But for the purposes of the base plan, the darker color obviously indicates higher concentrations of low-income. And low-income defined by the grant is people living at 150% of the poverty level or below. So say for a family of 4 with, say, 2 adults and 2 children, I think that equates to roughly $28,000 a year for a family of 4. Family of 2 or 2 adults would be about $17,000 a year. So anyway, those are, I believe, census tracts, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you. And here's the error, actually, and we'll move on. But real quick, these are actually off by a decimal point. That should be less than 20%. Not surprising, most of the region, but actually this is 20 to 40% of people in these census tracts fall under the criteria of the grant. And it seems awfully high, but a lot of areas that are green, but really only a few that are gray. And when we look at some of the areas, that's what we found. And so the yellow dots indicate what we had designated as target areas for where people live. Again, on here referred to as hubs, we call them target areas. And so that's where we've tried to focus new services and transportation options. Here's an employment map. Feel free to interrupt with questions. Just kind of ramble on through here. This is the base employment map that we used for the plan in 1998. And it's got quite a bit of data, and I know the font is very small, but the idea is that the light blue areas are designated by the Region 2040 plan as industrial and growth congregations, if you will, of growth industry. And so areas that we have focused on quite a bit are Rivergate, Swan Island, out here in the Rockwood, Gresham area. Wilsonville, actually, a large number of employers, as many as 750 employers down there. Tons of jobs down in Wilsonville that have, and the increase there has been substantial over the last several years. And of course, the gray here again is the TriMet boundary. I'm sorry I didn't mention that with the previous map, not the UGB. And in addition to focusing on where people live and where they might work, the grant also supports other programs and services. Here's a list generally of what we do in Portland. Transit amenities can include shelters, curb cuts, curb extensions, and transit tracker, which I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with, which in a lot of frequent bus shelters you'll find the display. And they're usually pretty accurate. I know they're, Dave might want to talk about that a little later, but that's real popular. Marketing and outreach we have a dedicated staff person at TriMet to do outreach for the grant. I'm getting carried away with a pointer here, sorry. Pointing at everything. Yes, you. Schedules and maps, general information for the grant. Again, promoting bicycling, and I'll talk about a bicycle program if we have time. I can't quite see the clock. I'm going to, okay, speed up a little here. And again, amenities for bikes and pedestrians, and we'll definitely show you some of that, as well as non-commute vouchers and travel training. If we have time, we'll talk about that too. I want to leave time for questions. And I know it's sunny out, so we'll try to move along. I think I'll start out talking about rural services. We'll kind of start on the edges and move our way in. So I'll show you a few examples here of some rural services, and this photo is very rural. This is Washington County. And the grant specifically says that you need to address the need for people in rural areas to get to work. And I'm passing out a publication by Ride Connection, who is our main provider out in rural Washington County. And they're one of the private nonprofit transportation providers that I mentioned earlier. Anyway, they provide a demand-responsive service out here. They subcontract a lot of rides out to Pacific Cab, but everyone is qualified and has to fall under the regulations required because it's federal dollars, so there's criminal background checks and all that that we're familiar with, drug and alcohol testing. But anyway, the idea is to get these folks in and get them on the TriMet system, get them on the fixed rail, get them on the bus system where they can access the job opportunities all over the region. And so here's an example of, I'm not sure what station this is, but it's definitely out in the Hillsborough area. But the idea is to get them on to TriMet. So a summary of, this is one of the older services, one of the first services we started with the job access money, and we started that in May of 2000. They average about 1,000 rides a month. It's expensive. I mean, there's a lot of miles involved. There's a lot of time. It's generally a 24-hour reservation. If they can, they'll try to go out and pick up a few people at once, especially during early morning hours when a lot of people are going to work. But this is actually, people use this service daily to get to work. If they're living out in Banks, or we pick up people out in Timber, if people know where Timber is. It's on the other side of the tunnel that goes to the coast. So yeah, it's very expensive, but it's important. And that service is available 7 days a week, and they also provide non-commute rides for people who may need to get the doctor's appointments, job interviews, job training centers. I'm not very good with colors, and so this one's quite bright, but it's a good contrast, I think. South Clackamas County, I'm going to pass these out. The outreach materials out in South Clackamas County, specifically Molalla and Canby, is bilingual. If you look, I know it's tough to read, but when you get the handout, Spanish on the right, and that happens to be the back side of the flyer with the schedule. But what we do is we fund a shuttle service that runs from Molalla to Canby. And what we've tried to do is establish a regional network for rural areas. Wilsonville, or otherwise known as SMART, they actually run service from Canby to Wilsonville. So while it might be a long trip, you could conceivably live in Molalla and commute to Wilsonville, where I, again, identified there's a ton of jobs. You could also ride into Canby and catch a bus to Oregon City on TriMet. TriMet, I know Canby's pulled out of the service district, but we have an agreement for them to run. TriMet will continue to run service into Canby for the next year or two before they're completely on their own. This service has been going for a year. It's done really well, actually. They're already up to the number similar to Ride Connection in about almost 1,000 rides a month. And it's only available Monday through Friday, so actually you could consider it even more successful in some regards. It's expensive again, but they've managed to keep the cost down to about $10 a ride, which is really good for rural service. And we've estimated in that, if you look at the, I know this is an awful map, but in this area, about 65 employers available. Shayna. That's okay.
Is that $10 a ride that it costs to provide, or is that what the customer's paying?
No, it's on this service, it's the cost of operating the route. And so I don't know if they, I know it's free in Wilsonville in the SMART system, I believe it is. Molalla might charge, it's very little, it's maybe $1.50. And I know Ride Connection charges a small amount out in Washington County. Dave, real quick, sorry.
Yeah, Dan, I wonder if you could just give some idea of what that $10 or the $19 a ride is relative to like regular fixed route service, just for some context.
Like with TriMet?
Yeah.
TriMet fixed route service runs about, on average, about $2.04 a ride. We certainly have routes that cost a little more and some that cost a lot less, but that's a system-wide average. and it's, for the most part, urban service. But it's a good question. And it falls about in the middle if you look at Ride Connections rural service. In the back.
Do they use these full capacity buses, 45-seaters, for these rural routes?
Use them for what? The what kind of buses?
5 capacity.
Oh no, they're generally. I have a photo of what I didn't have a good photo of South Clackamas service. You're talking about the vehicle itself and the capacity. Yeah, let me show you a picture real quick. I have a picture of the vehicle we use in Wilsonville, and it'll give you a great example. They're smaller, what we think of like airport shuttle type buses that hold, generally 15 to 20 people, and they're all lift accessible. So this is actually, it's a good segue. Thanks for the question. This actually is the vehicle that we've recently purchased with job access dollars for Wilsonville. And now Wilsonville runs a few services off job access. One actually one's a circulator in the city that feeds people into the system that runs up to the Barber Transit Center. Now, actually, that's the natural what we think of commute, but the idea is to also encourage people to get on the bus and go out to Wilsonville. And we know that people do that, but they're also coming in on that bus. And what we've been able to, and I think they do run a larger bus for that service. This happens to be the bus that's running to Canby. And so this is a better example of rural service type vehicles. But I know for some of the ride connection service, they actually do the rides in taxi cabs because they have to subcontract a lot of that service. It's difficult to meet the demands of such a large area. Does that answer your question, though? Okay. Okay. Yeah, this is great. This one's just done. They've just put the bike rack on and got the painting or the logos on. And this vehicle cost about $65,000, and it was funded with job access funds. So they run the service into Portland. They also run the service to Canby combined. Now, Canby just started about 3,000 rides a month, so pretty significant. And they being a little larger system, they can offer the rides at a much more competitive price, which is estimated average about $4. And again, the number of jobs down there is significant in Wilsonville. So as we sort of move in again to more suburban markets, we've also identified Tualatin to be a major industrial employment sector that provides a ton of jobs. I think there's as many as 100 jobs, or 100, that's not many jobs, 100 employers in the Wilsonville market. So what we do is we fund this shuttle that runs, it's operated by the TMA, and this is again a map off their website, but basically I-5 would be cutting through here. So here we have the Meridian Park Hospital, and the bus runs by the Mohawk Park and Ride, otherwise known as the Tualatin Park and Ride, TriMet Park and Ride. And the idea is to weave through Tualatin and meet these major employers, roughly 13 indicated on this map, and connect with Highway 99 where people can connect with the Line 12, the TriMet bus. So really it kind of bridges this gap between I-5 and Highway 99, and it does an early morning run downtown before fixed route service starts. If people need to get out to Tualatin, they might be able to ride the light rail into downtown and then take the vehicle out to Tualatin. And that's been a pretty successful service. It's actually been going for about a year, 600 rides a month, not too bad, and fairly competitive in cost per ride. Hey, Paul. Yeah.
Dan, I'm a little confused. Are these services just for low-income people, or are they available to anybody?
The dial-a-ride services are qualified over the phone, and a database is built, so for the rural services, like Ride Connection. However, anything that's fixed route, anyone can ride. So this is a fixed route, even though it's a smaller vehicle. We think of fixed route as full-size buses. Anyone can ride this. So what we do is this is an example of a service that we just try to channel into the employment area where we know there are a lot of these entry-level job opportunities. And that Malala example, the very flashy fire, yeah, that's another fixed route example. So kids ride it. We have all kinds of people that ride it, but we know that it is going through areas where there are a large number of low-income households. So it's a good question, actually, and the best way we can qualify people is through the dial-a-ride services. So we'll talk about the urban, not too bad on time. Okay, we'll go into working into the center here, some of the urban services. TriMet invest grant dollars in fixed route service in primarily three routes, and one is being the 6, and most of this is match dollars. We have used some grant dollars to improve service, but TriMet's commitment to the grant has been matched, and so what we've done in a lot of these routes, such as the 6, which goes right through north to northeast Portland, up MLK, actually starts downtown, well, we know at PSU, over the Hawthorne Bridge. Extend evening service, try to add weekend service. Again, a lot of these targeted jobs are available at, swing graveyard type situations. So if we can expand off-peak service, we can improve access to and from population areas and employment areas. Another example is the 33. It runs out. It's a frequent route that runs out to Oregon City, which has been recognized as a target employment a target population area based on the spatial analysis we performed. And then the 71 finally, which runs through the Lentz area, up around, connects with the light rail before it returns down. I think that runs on 122nd. Anyway, connects with both the blue and the red line and getting out near Gresham. But that's a very busy route as well. And we've been able to expand off-peak service on that route too. So here's a summary of what we've seen with the investments in fixed route. We've invested about $1.6 million in fixed route service, generating about 1.2 million. This gets to Dave's question about the cost per ride. We know all of these routes exceed the system average. So all of these 3 routes exceed 31 boardings an hour, a vehicle hour. They are cheaper than $2.04 a ride, and quite a few boardings, 1.2 million, and again, off-peak service serving Oregon City, Northeast, and Lentz. There questions about fixed route? It's kind of a lot to take in right there, but we're pretty pleased with what we've seen. Swan Island is an area where we know there's a lot of jobs, and so we've done both we've invested operating and capital funds in Swan Island. And here's me really bad with colors. They're difficult to see, but here is the blue line that you see is actually a TriMet route called the 85 that runs down to Swan Island, peak periods only, during basically the early morning and as late as, I believe, 8 o'clock at night, or maybe 6 or 7. But what we also fund with grant funds is an evening shuttle that runs from 8 p.m. to midnight. And it runs down to the Rose Quarter, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, where they connect with a number of bus routes, and it runs out to Swan Island until midnight. And so it helps people trying to get to swing shifts or grave shifts or get home. 72 is a very busy bus route in TriMet system, and it actually runs down to Swan Island as well. But it only runs down basically to the bottom of Going Street, and where it lays over and returns back.
What's the frequency of that shuttle, and how does that correspond with the shift when the shifts get off?
It departs every half an hour, so really there's no downtime. There's not much of a layover time. It departs the Rose Quarter every half hour, so that really gives it only half an hour to make the trip down and back. There's a TMA that actually manages the Swan Island Transportation Management Association manages the shuttle, and we have given them the liberty they have the liberty rather to micromanage the schedule of the shuttle to meet major shifts that might be changing. So my understanding is that it does meet most of the major shifts on Swan Island. And if it isn't right now, it can always change and accommodate them. And they have a lot of seasonal changes down there, with the parcel service with UPS and FedEx. So there are changes to the route, especially around the holidays. Any more questions on Swan Island's done quite well, actually. It's one of our oldest services, and about 400 rides a month at about $8, and that's pretty good for being an off-peak service. But we know there's about roughly 50, give or take, employers down there offering as many as 8,000 jobs. And so what we've also done, again, really bad on colors here, I'm sorry, but Swan Island, for those who aren't familiar, is located in North Portland. And the blue lines indicated in Northeast Portland here, North and Northeast Portland, are designated bike routes. And so Swan Island, if you just look at it in this regard, is pretty accessible. Part of the problem has been getting people down to the island, and there are limited ways to get down to the island, as we all know. And so what we've done is we invested $80,000 in general cleanup and bike and pedestrian infrastructure. And just a simple thing like this sidewalk was badly overgrown. It happens to be a 72 heading down the hill. This would be heading east up towards Interstate Avenue. We've paid money to have the sidewalk cleaned up, trim back the bushes to increase the sight line because there's a slight turn to the road there and it can be dangerous crossing. Had a sidewalk constructed to access, if you can see in the background, a new crosswalk that we paid. We striped a crosswalk. Access at the east end of Swan Island for pedestrians is pretty rough. And the bus runs, both the bus services that run down there, the 85 and the 72 stop, the most frequent stops are down on the east end of the island. And so any way we could accommodate pedestrians on the east end, which we've done here, has helped. And something as simple as a curb cut can mean a lot to a bicyclist such as this. And I was really lucky to catch that. It was on a Sunday when I took it. But anyway, another example of an urban service, Rockwood, out sort of getting towards Gresham. Some might consider that suburban, but the purpose of this shuttle is to run down to the light rail. And this is an example of what we call like a van pool shuttle, where it operates in Rockwood, but you see on the vehicle, Viking Industries actually provides their own drivers for this vehicle, which we lease through Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And these folks can get down to, they have really the vehicle to use 24 hours a day. Well, obviously when the train's not running, it doesn't move much. But the idea is to get people down to the Rockwood station. And I used a map of the 87, which is a peak-only route. But Viking is here, and getting them down to the light rail during off-peak periods is a big deal because the 87 doesn't run late at night or early in the morning. And the train runs as late as 2 a.m. So actually the vehicle gets used a lot. It's been pretty successful. 250 rides, that's all from the same employer. So that's not a fixed route type that's picking up people on the street. And $5 a ride, pretty affordable, but they do provide their own drivers. So, and that's not reflected in that. So that's basically the lease to Enterprise Rent-A-Car, who provides the van and gas and fuel and whatnot. So, which actually I think in that case Viking may pay for itself. So another circulator service is the Workforce Shuttle, which this happens to be on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, where actually President Bush stopped, I think, a year ago. I lived near here. It was quite chaotic, but that is where he went in and did a press event, and that is a major workforce center in North and Northeast Portland, recognized again as a target area and a hub for population purposes. I like this one because it's got the person on the bike, and you've got actually a nice bus shelter and signage there. It runs to several sites. Actually, I have a list of where this shuttle runs, and I'll pass it around real quick. It's not a great map, but you get an idea. This is out at Columbia Villa, the Goalpost Center, another job, career-type training facility. And so the van basically circulates, and there's a fixed schedule on their website. And it would allow people to make trips that would normally be quite long on transit. So it's a great resource. This service hasn't been running very long, though, so we're trying to promote ridership still. Yeah.
Is that part of the non-commute voucher?
No, I'll get to that though. I actually brought one, but I'll need it back. But no, good question. Actually, if we have time, I'll try to speed up a little here. Actually, I think we're getting pretty close. We'll talk about that. This van makes a number of stops in North and Northeast, and one of which, I'm sorry I didn't provide the addresses here, is 42nd and Killingsworth, which is the Metro Center, which is actually a stop on another van network operated through Mount Hood Community College, part of the Workforce Center system. And this van is operated again by the East County campus or community college, and it runs too. So again, we're trying to establish some kind of a network where someone was maybe at the goalpost, again, it'd be a long ride, but someone at the Goalpost Center conceivably could get out to the Steps to Success Center on 122nd. It might take 2.5 hours on transit. We could actually help them. And all these services are approved by our labor union because it's a very sensitive issue. We can't take people off the bus. So we have to make a case why this service is needed because a rider would without it, have to take 3 hours out of their day to get from one part of the region to the other. So that's very important. Believe me, I won't go into too much detail on that. But anyway, so here's the East County service. This one's been going for a while. Here's the Steps to Success Center on 122nd, where they have access to a variety of resources for job training, resume building, job searching. So I like that photo, even though it's not very clear. And this has been a successful, one of the older services, about 425 rides a month, and relatively affordable. And again, examples of where they can get. Doesn't really provide access to jobs necessarily, but job training opportunities. And it's available during basic hours, Monday through Friday. And so, talking about non-commute vouchers, here we've got a little time we can talk about some of the other supporting programs and services that the grant pays for. And one of those is the Create a Commuter program. We talked about bicycles being outlined in the grant. Well, this program is administered by the Community Cycling Center, which is located on Northeast 18th in Alberta. And for those who haven't been there, check it out. Even if you don't bike, it's a great example of a grassroots, neighborhood-based organization that I've donated 2 bikes to them already. And they're very resourceful, and what they do is they take referrals from a social service provider network of people who want bikes to get around. And so they're qualified people that are low income and in need of flexible transportation. They can use it just to get to the TriMet system. They could use it to bike down to Swan Island, which is not far from here. So far to date, they've given out, and they're all refurbished bicycles, 300 bikes. And with the funding increase, we're going to actually double their annual production to, I think in the coming year, we're looking at 350 to 400 bikes that we're expecting them to refurbish. There's a huge waiting list. And with the program, they get training on how to fix their bike, repair it, general repairs, maintenance. They also get safety equipment, lights, rain gear, helmets. So it's pretty nice. But you can imagine the demand is quite high in the waiting list, but they're all qualified candidates. And so, non-commute vouchers. I'm going to pass one around. I haven't missed any of my handouts. This is great. This is the fine. I had this up on a slide, but the fine print is just unbearable. So, people can use these to get the job interviews. They're, again, referred to by their social service provider or case manager, if you will, and we'll pass it. I've only got one, and I do need it back. But I think I've already briefly talked about that, $25 maximum value. If someone did need a ride to the Steps East Center, they could use that if they had a job fair or a job interview possibly. I get the carbon copies of all these once a month from Broadway Cab, who provides most of these rides. And again, they do need to go through the screening process because of federal dollars, drug and alcohol and everything, criminal background checks. And they get used quite a bit. It's picking up in popularity. It's taken a while. But sometimes I have to make there's some quality assurance issues that need to be followed up on, especially when I get some there for like $50. Makes me wonder. Yeah.
What's the average cost for a ride using this program?
Oh, they're usually around $20 to $25. Yeah. And they're usually making pretty long trips. Again, I've seen some even higher. It's rare to find one under $10. But I do look, and it's required on the form that they indicate what the ride is for, and so I do go through them to make sure they're not. I have one person I know that I noticed one individual that was using it to get to work. That's okay for the first few times, but after a while it's like, they really need to find an alternative because, $25 a ride starts to add up. But I try to be as flexible as I can with them.
Is there any monitoring so it doesn't end up like in black market? Or because...
Well, I distribute them. I'm pretty, how do I put this? I don't just throw them out there. Everyone gets blocks of like 50 to 100 at the most, depending on their level of usage. But no, there isn't. Other than once they're redeemed, I'll get the carbons. And if I see anything that looks suspicious, then I would maybe call the dozen or so agencies that are using them and ask if anything's been going on like that. But no, we haven't had a problem with it. So real quick, are people familiar with SAFE-T, the new transportation bill, I guess we want to call it, that the President has proposed? And amazing the word safe used, but Safe, Accountable, Flexible, and Efficient Transportation Act of 2003. Job access, otherwise known as job access reverse commute, that's the acronym JARC. And the reverse commute is, again, acknowledging the suburban job market element. It's included in SAFE-T, which I'm pretty excited about because I think we want to. In preliminary discussions with TriMet, I think we have plans on continuing this program, if we can secure SAFE-T funds. And I don't think it's going to be as a competitive process. The funds through a formula process based, I believe, on population. They'll just say, okay, Oregon, you get $2 million. You know, New York, you get 30. California, you get 40 or whatever. A little smaller than California and New York. But I think what it means to Portland is, based on that graph I'd shown earlier about funding levels, we're probably looking at anywhere from $1 million to $1.5 million annual in Portland, which isn't bad. It's not as much as we're getting right now, but based on, you know, it's not surprising that we're not getting more, I guess. It's just what I'm trying to say, but it's still a considerable amount of money. So I think that's it. If people have questions, I've already taken a few, but I'd be happy. Yeah, Paul.
Dan, what kind of internal or FTA evaluation is required or TriMet is going to do?
That, you know, that has been the reporting process. Quarterly, we report to FTA on the status of all these programs. We report ridership, cost per ride data. They've had a hard time getting their arms around the job access program, and it's kind of gotten a bad rap in the House when the renewal funds keep coming up in the appropriation. Maybe that's one of the reasons the appropriation levels have been low to non-existent, is because FTA has had a hard time again reporting to Congress on this program. But I generally report in I think it's an easily formatted database where I list all the programs and the cost per ride and the number of quarterly rides. And so we're accountable to the FTA. That could change, you know, if we start having to work through the state. The whole program could be completely revamped. I may not have any contact with the FTA. But it's a good question. It's been a bit of a challenge. Yeah.
So was the size of the Canby Smart Bus determined by present or future demand?
The size of the vehicle? Oh, so we were using that smaller vehicle, but they have told us that they would upgrade it to a 30 or even a 40-foot bus if it was warranted. Does that answer your question?
So it was based off of current demand then?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and as far as I know, it's going pretty well. It's averaging about 750 rides a month, which is pretty good, and I'm sure it will grow. Shana?
So I see that you have to keep kind of strict track of the numbers, of course, but
Right.
But as far as kind of just stories and like qualitative feedback, are you getting, you know, folks calling up saying, gee, thanks so much,
Yeah.
or service agencies calling up saying, we feel like, even if, you know, whether we have the numbers or not, we feel like this is making a big difference?
Yeah, part of the application process is letters of support, and so we'll get them from our regular subrecipients, and they'll often include testimonials and, you know, special letters. We even had a press event one year when funds came to the region where Gordon Smith showed up, and it was a big event at the Metro Center on 42nd Killingsworth. And we actually had a lady, a client visit from Mount Hood Community College Steps, the Steps to Success program, who provide testimonial personally to the senator and thanked him for the you know, services that the funds are, you know, providing. So yes, we do, and we collect them, but a little difficult to quantify, but they are out there for sure.
Yeah, my first experience with these kind of transit systems was my friend told me to meet him in Wilsonville, and so I just went on the 12 or whatever, or the 95 or whatever bus goes down there, and all of a sudden it stopped, and I wasn't in Wilsonville, and I didn't know about the smart buses. And
at the edge of the service boundary,
so for people like me who just get up and go, or people who don't have internet access to figure out the system on, you know, via the web, because I've been to a couple now on the web, and I realize, oh, okay, this is the schedule, and this is the routes, and this is the frequency. What are the ways that you're telling people about these sites so that to increase ridership or to make the experience less scary?
You know, in the support, that's a really good question. The supporting services, actually I'd referred to way back, was travel training. And so this in part answers your question. We provide funding for travel training for non-English speaking folks, where we'll actually go out to county corrections departments, and really we just have that staff person and the travel training, the outreach staff person, and we promote all this material, produce all this material, and just try to get as much of the word out as we can, and try to encourage people to connect with like the Steps East program, where they have electronic access to information, or they can learn how to use it. But you know, as expected, dissemination of information is one of the biggest challenges, especially for an unwired, if you will, population. So it's still a challenge. We just do the best we can. Printed materials, we print nearly everything in at least Spanish and English. Oh, certainly English. And I believe we have how to ride videos in 7 languages that we go out to social service agencies and nonprofits and provide them. And we give them the card and say, if you're having an event, let us come out. So our marketing rep does a lot of outreach, a lot of presentations. But does that answer your question, or we'll follow up?
One follow-up question.
Yeah.
So one of the things from my perspective as an urban dweller, I would love to take a bus, like the Estacada bus. I love that bus. You just go out to Estacada. And you said there seems to be a fixed route from Canby to Malala. Is that a fixed route?
It is.
Yeah, like I would love to take that with my bike on the front rack and then just be in Malala and see stuff. So I guess is there anything you're doing to tell current residents that if you take the Max to Gresham, there's some rural bus you can get on and go farther or something?
Current residents of Malala, or just in the region in general?
Well, just anybody. Like, I would love to have a bus that I could take to Hillsborough, or take the Max to Hillsborough and then get on a bus and keep going into the Coast Range. It might be a fixed route for somebody trying to get to Tillamook, but for me it would be a recreational trip. Is there any way to tell urbanites about these infrastructure so that maybe you might get some usage from
More
them as well?
discretionary travel.
Yeah.
It's not aggressively marketed that way. Electronically, everything I've talked about is available on the internet through TriMet's website. Otherwise, nearly all the marketing efforts are focused on the target audiences. So I guess the answer is yes and no, but the non-wired options are limited.
I only asked this question because I know that the only way government's going to pay for it is if there's a need. But I see it as a amenity of urban people, so that it could just up the ridership. So
Yeah, no, I hear you loud and clear. Yeah.
I noticed originally when you were targeting the employment areas and where there's jobs and where there's high unemployment, that it cut off right at the Columbia, obviously TriMet servicing the Portland area. Is there any collaboration between TriMet and C-Tran? Because I know, just looking on I-5 every day, that there's a huge commute from Vancouver to Portland for jobs. And is there any collaboration with C-Tran in order to help those folks out too?
To my knowledge, there isn't. There certainly, in my opinion, there certainly should be. But I am the third service planner at TriMet to administer this grant. And so I wasn't involved in the original grant, but my answer is no, but there should be. And and again, I've been given strong indications that TriMet will likely apply for future JARC funds through SAFE-T. And at that point, we would probably look to, I would lobby to include Clark County. Maybe we'd qualify for more money. But if it's going to be a state funding-based deal, as we know from past experiences, that state line, can be quite a division, unfortunately. But I don't know if any analysis was done on the job market in Clark County. Our observations, obviously, are that a lot of people are coming in here, or whether there are a lot of low-income households in Clark County, I don't know. But we should find out. Certainly, yeah. Rob.
A question whether car sharing would qualify for these funds.
Car sharing is actually designated in, actually, it's funny you ask. I just got a call the other day, and I understand that someone within the metro area, a nonprofit, has actually applied for their own job access funds and has been earmarked for about 200, which is a congressional earmark. I'm not even 100% sure how it works. But they've secured, I think, almost $200,000 or around $200,000 for the promotion of the grant will allow for the purchasing of vehicles, personal vehicles, if they know that they're going to, and I don't know how this works, if they're going to be used for car sharing. But what we've also, I didn't include in the supplemental services or the last part of the presentation, we did administer a few carpool incentive programs in Swan Island and Rivergate, and that was rewarding people for sharing the ride to work, and the rewards increased by the number of people in the car and the shifts they were accessing. So we have experimented with carpool programs with the grant, but they're heavy, takes a lot of administration, manage the rewards. And Paul.
Dan, taking that discussion one step further, how do you or TriMet answer the argument that we should be basically buying people cars, people who are on welfare. I'm sure you've heard this argument before. How would you address that?
Well, I think the fact that the FTA is, I'm not sure how to answer that. It's a great question because there's plenty of research out there that tells you that that is probably one of the most effective ways to really mobilize is to encourage car ownership, right? So, but as a TriMet employee, I certainly can't advocate. But it's a great question, Paul, and if they're ride sharing this, certainly we would encourage it. So I'm interested to see, I'm going to talk more with this local agency on what's going on with their grant and their earmark and what they plan to do with these funds that should promote ownership of vehicles. Because it's something we can't ignore. Yeah, Charles.
And I just have a question about the Steps for Success program you talked about. You showed that computer center. Is that funded by the job access program, or is it collaboration with other agencies, or how does it work?
We just focus on the transportation. So I don't know if I can answer that. I can imagine that community colleges are very resourceful with grant funds. And they approached us about, helping people get there. But I don't know. I don't know about the details of funding that particular program. But our job is certainly to focus on transportation and mobilize people and provide them with as many options as possible, as well as vehicles, I suppose. Sorry, can't answer that in more detail. Oh, sure, Dave.
Maybe you touched on this already, but how have the employers, have you had feedback from employers on whether with this program their employees seem to be able to get to work more independently, or they turnover issues might be a little bit better, you know what I'm saying, because that's kind of the purpose of this program, is to get people their jobs more independently.
Yeah. Most of it, again, like sort of what Shana was getting at, a lot of it's anecdotal. Hey, that extra run on the 6 has been a huge help, or, running the whatever. But you know what? We get limited feedback from employers. The Rockwood Viking shuttle I showed you with the 3 gentlemen getting on the vehicle, yeah, we hear from them all the time. I mean, it's great. But for the most part, kind of like the Steps East answer I gave to Charles about, the best we can do is just put them out there. We have private sector stakeholders on the committee, but again, it seems like there's always new people showing up, and generally people show up when they have a specific need. But no, at this point, most of the evidence we have, or feedback from employers, has been anecdotal. What we do report to the FTA is anytime we start a service or change a service, my job is to let the FTA know how many new employers or total jobs we are creating access to. So that's how we come up with those figures, like on Swan Island. I was talking about Tualatin and Wilsonville. We know there's 750 employers, and based on the data we have that we usually get from the State of Oregon the Employment Department, we get general job figures. So I report all that to the FTA. Yeah, Carrie.
I think you mentioned this a little bit, but what is the availability of free or reduced fare, like bus passes, for people either transitioning from welfare or just low-income people who are trying to get to work?
The regulations of the grant specifically say that grant funds cannot be spent for free fares. I know that, such as the match provider, Adult and Family, or formerly known as Multnomah County Adult and Family Services, now known as the Oregon Department of Human Services, Multnomah County, they buy fares for their clients. So I get that call. I get calls like that a lot, where people would like me to provide them with some bus tickets, and it seems to make sense. But I think what we're looking at is the long-term picture, and that's solving long-term transportation issues. Not that getting to an interview isn't important, but we tend to rely on private sector and nonprofit organizations to provide that. So it's a great question because I get called about it all the time. So in the non-commute vouchers, that's typically what I will offer, is say, here are some alternatives if you need to get people to an interview or whatnot. An essential service, short notice, which might even be quicker than having to plan a bus route. So, bus trip rather. So. Any more questions? 1 o'clock? That's early, isn't it?
Thank you very much, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Next week we have a couple planners from City of Portland talking about Portland's transportation system plan, and we're going to be starting at 12:15 next week as a one-time only thing because of another event going on campus. And then the week after that we have Carrie Sullivan talking about jobs, job access, and car ownership.
I dodged that.